Wow, you've really been digging into dog behavior.
Lots of notes here.
Looks like you're on a mission to decode your furry friend.
It's fascinating, isn't it? There's so much to unpack.
Yeah, and speaking of unpacking, I see brain training for dogs all over these notes. What's piqued your interest there?
It's really interesting how it seems to focus on the why behind a dog's actions. Like, it's less about just stopping the barking and more about figuring out, well, is the dog bored or stressed? Maybe they're trying to tell us something specific.
So it's less about those quick fixes and more about really getting into their heads, huh?
Exactly. It uses that understanding to build games and exercises that tap into those natural instincts. Like, instead of just yelling no
Yeah.
at the barking, it might suggest, teaching them to bark on command, then slowly weaning them off that need to bark at everything.
Oh, that's pretty clever. I know I've definitely been guilty of just reacting to the barking instead of thinking, okay, what's going on here? What are you trying to tell me?
Oh, it's a common mistake. We humans, we can be a bit impatient. But dogs, they really thrive on consistency, clear communication, and this method seems to really get that.
So let's get specific. Let's say barking is driving me crazy. How would this brain training for dogs tackle that differently compared to like the traditional methods?
Well, a lot of traditional methods might focus on punishment or suppressing the barking, but this program really seems to dig deeper, asking like, what's the need the barking is fulfilling? Is it attention seeking, boredom, maybe even anxiety? And then it offers exercises to target that specific need.
So for a bored dog, you might have a puzzle, right? Something that makes them work for a treat, keeps them busy.
Exactly. You're redirecting that energy. And for a dog who's anxious, they might teach relaxation techniques or build confidence through games. It's all about giving the dog a sense of control.
Relaxation techniques for dogs. Now that's a new one. Are we talking aromatherapy candles and Enya?
Maybe not Enya, but you'd be surprised. They might, for example, teach the dog to settle on a mat, right? And associate it with all kinds of positive things and slowly increase that duration. It's based on the same principles as like human relaxation techniques, just adapted for our furry friends.
That's wild. It's funny. I've got notes here on ignoring jumping as a form of, negative punishment. But this sounds so much more positive, more like collaborating with your dog.
That's a great point. And that ties into one of the core principles of brain training for dogs. It's called operant conditioning. It's basically understanding that, well, behaviors are influenced by their consequences. So if jumping up is ignored, it's less likely to happen again. But if it's rewarded with attention, even negative attention, well, it'll become a habit.
That makes sense. It's like even yelling no is giving them something. They're like, hey, I got a response. Got to do that again.
Exactly. And that's why this program really focuses on rewarding the behaviors we want, right? So instead of what they're doing wrong, we're looking at what they're doing right. Like if they sit politely instead of jumping, boom, reward, praise, treats, a fun game.
Okay, I see how this could really work for all sorts of issues, not just barking and jumping. What about something like destructive chewing? My dog goes through chew toys like it's nobody's business.
Oh, destructive chewing. That's a great example where this method can really shine. Instead of just throwing a bunch of chew toys at the problem, it makes you think, why are they chewing? Teething, boredom, anxiety, and then targeted solutions.
So you're saying teething puppy, maybe frozen chew toys,
Right.
or soothe those gums,
Yeah.
bored dog, puzzle toys, something to keep that mind engaged.
Exactly. You've got it. And for an anxious chewer, you might try activities that build their confidence, give them an outlet for that nervous energy. Things like maybe scent work or trick training.
Okay, this is really making me rethink my whole approach to dog training. I've always been more, command and control. But this brain training for dogs, it's like opening a whole new channel of communication with your dog.
That's the beauty of it. It's building a partnership, right? Not
Yeah.
just trying to control them. And the more we understand how those amazing dog brains work, the better we can communicate and meet their needs.
And speaking of needs, leash pulling. That's one that really tests my patience. Turns a nice walk into a wrestling match.
Oh, I hear you. Leash pulling, it's a common battle. But again, brain training for dogs, it takes a different approach. Instead of just focusing on physical restraint or corrections, it teaches the dog that, hey, walking politely, that's actually way more rewarding than pulling.
So instead of yanking them back or using a choke chain, we're talking about like a game where they get rewarded for staying close and walking nicely.
You got it. They might use a technique called silky leash, where the dog gets a reward for keeping that leash loose. Or maybe teaching the dog to focus on the handler, using like a target stick or a special cue.
Okay, I'm really intrigued. But before we get too deep into the techniques, I want to circle back to something you said earlier, this idea of understanding the why behind the behavior.
Oh, it's so important. And it's something that brain training for dogs really stresses. Instead of just treating the symptoms, we're looking for the root cause, right?
So with separation anxiety, for example, it's not just about stopping them from barking or destroying things when we leave.
Yeah.
It's more about understanding why they're so distressed in the first place.
Exactly. It might be that they haven't been properly conditioned to being alone. Or maybe there's an underlying anxiety disorder there that needs to be addressed. And the program, it seems to offer very specific protocols for both those scenarios.
So instead of a Band-Aid, we're actually treating the problem, the source, which, long term makes a lot more sense.
Exactly. And that's why this approach can be so powerful. It's not just about obedience, it's about understanding those emotional needs, those psychological needs of your dog.
And, looking at my notes here, I've got a ton on managing separation anxiety, things like gradual desensitization, crate training. But I'm curious, how does brain training for dogs tackle this specific challenge?
It really seems to focus on, building up their confidence, their independence, and doing it gradually. So not just like throwing them into the deep end, but actually, using games and exercises that help them build up those coping mechanisms for being alone.
So we're talking about giving them the tools to feel safe and secure even when, their person isn't right there.
Exactly. And, one of the key concepts they use is this idea of counter conditioning, which, sounds complicated, but it's basically just changing their emotional response to being alone. So instead of fear and anxiety, they start associating it with, well, good stuff like treats or fun games.
Okay, I can see how that would work, but I gotta admit, I'm still a little iffy on the whole crate treating thing. I know it's like recommended a lot, but it just seems so, I don't know, confining.
Yeah, I totally get the hesitation. But crate training, when it's done right, it can be a really great tool, especially for dogs with that separation anxiety.
Really. I always thought it was more about like, owner convenience, keeping the dog out of trouble when they're not home.
Well, it can be that too, but it can also be like, providing them a sense of security, a predictable space.
So like their own little den, a safe haven when they're feeling overwhelmed.
Exactly. You got it. The key is to introduce it slowly and positively, making it a fun, rewarding place to be.
Okay, that makes way more sense. I guess in my head it was more like a punishment, which obviously is not what we want.
No, not at all. And it seems like brain training for dogs, they have like a whole module on it, with
Yeah.
step-by-step instructions, tips for making it a good experience for the dog.
Oh, that's good to know. I'm starting to see the appeal of this whole method. It's like it takes all the traditional training advice and kind of elevates it, really focusing on the dog's perspective,
Yeah.
their well-being.
You're right. It's not just about, obedience. It's about building that relationship built on trust and understanding and mutual respect.
Listening to all this, it's making me realize that a lot of these challenges we've been talking about, the barking, the jumping, chewing, separation anxiety, I mean, a lot of it seems to stem from, well, lack of mental stimulation.
That's a really good point, and that's something that brain training for dogs really seems to get.
It's like if we can keep those brains engaged, keep them challenged, they're less likely to get into trouble or, develop some of these behavioral issues.
Exactly. And it looks like they provide a whole toolbox of games and exercises that target those different cognitive skills. Things like problem solving, focus, impulse control.
Oh, so we're talking like a brain workout, like
Yeah.
we do for our own physical fitness.
Exactly. And the best part? It's fun. For both the dog and the owner. It's like playing interactive puzzles together. But with the added benefit of, strengthening that bond and improving their behavior.
It's like turning training into a game,
Yeah.
right, instead of a chore.
Exactly. And who doesn't love a good game?
So, okay, I'm sold on the whole brain training for dogs concept, but I got to ask, what kind of games are we talking about? What do these exercises actually involve?
Well, based on your notes, it looks like they cover a pretty wide range. Everything from basic obedience training to, more advanced stuff like scent work, trick training.
I'm picturing dogs doing Sudoku now, playing chess.
Well, maybe not that advanced, but you'd be surprised what they can do. One of the games that seems to be like a core part of the program is called hide and seek.
Oh, hide and seek. I love that game. I used to play that with my kids all the time. But how does that work with the dog?
Yeah, it's a similar idea, but, adapted for dogs. So basically, you teach them to find a hidden toy or a treat, and they're using their sense of smell, their problem-solving skills.
That sounds like so much fun, and I bet it keeps them mentally stimulated.
Exactly. And it also teaches things like impulse control and patience because they have to, wait for their cue before they start searching.
This could be really helpful for leash pulling too, right? If they learn that impulse control, that patience, it's got to carry over to walking, don't you think?
Absolutely. And speaking of leash pulling, it looks like brain training for dogs has a technique specifically for that called the focus game.
The focus game. Okay, I'm all ears. What's that all about?
So it's basically about teaching the dog to really pay attention to their handler, even when there's distractions all around. So instead of getting fixated on, other dogs or squirrels or whatever, they learn to keep their focus on you.
That's like a superpower for dogs. How do they even teach that?
Well, they start by teaching a specific cue for focus, right? It could be a word, a hand signal, a sound. And then they gradually increase the difficulty, introduce distractions, and reward the dog for, maintaining that focus.
So we're building up their concentration muscles, so to speak.
Exactly. And the amazing thing is, once they have that skill, it can apply to all sorts of situations, not just walking.
That's incredible. This whole method, it could really transform their behavior. And not just that, their well-being. But let's be real, not every dog is, a perfect angel. There are going to be times when they misbehave, even with the best training in the world.
Oh, absolutely. And it seems like brain training for dogs, they get that. It's not about, creating robotic dogs that never mess up. It's about giving them the tools to make good choices.
So it's more about, teaching them to learn from their mistakes.
Yeah.
And making better decisions in the future instead of just, punishing them for every little slip-up.
Exactly. It's about seeing those mistakes as opportunities, not failures.
That's such a good way to think about it. I've always been so focused on, behave perfectly, that I've forgotten to just enjoy the learning process.
And that's where the fun comes in. Because when we focus on progress, not perfection, training becomes a lot more enjoyable for both of us.
I love that. Okay, I'm convinced brain training for dogs sounds like the perfect approach for anyone who really wants to connect with their dog and address those behavioral challenges. But before we wrap up, I have one last question. We've talked a lot about the good stuff with brain training for dogs, but are there any, downsides, things people should keep in mind?
That's smart. Always good to, look at all sides before jumping into something new. I mean, brain training for dogs seems great, really well-rounded and positive.
Yeah.
But it's not magic, right?
Well, so no quick fixes, no guaranteed solution to every problem.
Exactly. It takes time, consistency, effort from the owner. And just like with any training, you got to pick methods that fit your dog, right? Their personality, their learning style.
Makes sense. Not every dog learns the same way, right? Some are quick learners, others need more, more patience, more repetition.
Absolutely. And you got to be realistic about, yourself, too, your own commitment. Brain training for dogs seems like it's a lot of interactive stuff, games and all, so you can't just, do it passively while you're watching TV. Gotta be engaged.
Not a set it and forget it kind of thing, huh? You got to put in the work.
Yep. But the good news is the work seems pretty fun. It's not drilling commands or being harsh. It's playing games, building that bond.
I like that. Turning training into quality time, not a chore.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the best things about it. It really focuses on that bond we have with our dogs, seeing them as partners, not just pets to be trained.
Listening to all this, I'm thinking about my own dog. She loves learning new things. I think she'd really dig these brain games.
I bet she would. Dogs are naturally curious, smart, and they thrive when their brains are working.
And I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of excited to try it myself.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like such a fun way to connect with her, really get on her level.
I'm excited for you. And remember, the journey matters just as much as the destination, right? That's where the real magic happens, learning and growing together.
That's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive here into dog behavior solutions and brain training for dogs. We covered a lot today, the importance of mental stimulation, all these cool techniques that really tap into a dog's smarts.
It's been a great conversation, lots to think about. Hopefully everyone listening has some new ideas, some inspiration for their own journey with their furry companions.
Yeah, absolutely. And, got to remember, every dog's different. What works for one might not work for another. It's about staying curious. Observing your dog, being patient, consistent.
Couldn't agree more. And don't be afraid to experiment a little, right? Find what works best for both of you. Most importantly, have fun, enjoy it.
So well said. And for anyone listening who's, ready to give brain training a shot, check out those resources you've got. Maybe give brain training for dogs a try. You might be amazed at what your dog can do. Until next time, happy training.